3. Flipping eagerly through the pages of Al-Zahra until he found Ralph Ilwan's column, Said began to read while still only a few yards from the house where he'd spent the night, the house of Sheikh Ali al-Junaidi. But what was it that seemed to be inspiring Ilwan now? Said found only comments on women's fashions, on loudspeakers, and on a reply to a complaint by an anonymous wife. Diverting enough, but what had become of the Rauf Ilwan he'd known? Said thought of the good old days at the students' hostel, and particularly of the wonderful enthusiasm that had radiated from a young peasant with shabby clothes, a big heart, and a direct and glittering style of writing. What was it that had happened in the world? What lay behind these strange and mysterious events? Did things happen that were similar to what took place in Al-Sarafi Lane? And how about Nabawiya and Eilish and their dear little girl who rejected her father? I must see him, he thought. The sheikh has given me a mat to sleep on, but I need money. I must begin life afresh, Mr. Ilwan, and for that purpose you are no less important than Sheikh Ali. You are, in fact, the most important thing I have in this insecure world. He walked on until he reached the Zahra offices in Marif Square, an enormous building where his first thought was that it would be very difficult to break into. The rows of cars surrounding it were like guards around a prison. The rumble of printing presses behind the grilles of the basement windows was like the low hum of men sleeping in a dormitory. He joined the stream of people entering the building, presented himself at the information desk, and asked in his deep, public voice for Mr. Ralph Ilwan. Staring back with some displeasure at the bold, almost impudent look in his eyes, the reception clerk snapped, "Fourth floor." Said made for the elevator at once, joining people among whom he looked rather out of place in his blue suit and gym shoes, the oddness emphasized by the glaring eyes on either side of his long, aquiline nose. A girl caught his eye, which made him curse his ex-wife and her lover under his breath, promising them destruction. From the corridor of the fourth floor, he slipped into the secretary's office before an attendant had time to intercept him, and found himself in a large rectangular room with one glass wall overlooking the street, but no place to sit. He heard the secretary on the telephone, telling someone that Mr. Rauf was at a meeting with the editor-in-chief and would not be back for at least 2 hours. In and out of place, Said poised himself with bravado, staring at the other people in the room almost defiantly, remembering a time when he would have fixed his gaze on people like them, as if he wished to cut their throats. What were such people like nowadays, he wondered. Ralph was now a very important man, it seemed, a great man, as great as this room. It isn't a suitable place for a reunion of old friends. Ralph won't be able to behave naturally here. There was a time when he'd been nothing more than a scribbler with the magazine Al-Nadir, tucked away in Shahir Muhammad Ali, a poor writer whose voice rang with demands for freedom. I wonder what you're like now, Ralph. Will he have changed like you, Nabawiya? Will he disown me as Sana has? No, I must banish these evil thoughts. He's still a friend and mentor, a sword of freedom ever drawn, and he'll always be like that. Despite this impressiveness, this plush office suite, and those puzzling articles. If this citadel will not allow me to embrace you, Ralph, I'll have to look in the telephone directory and find your home address. Seated on the damp grass along the riverbank beside Shahir al-Nil, he waited. He waited even longer near a tree silhouetted by the light of an electric lamp. The crescent moon had gone down early, leaving stars to glitter in a sky profoundly black, and a soft breeze blew, distilled from the breath of the night after a day of stunning, searing summer. There he sat, with his arms clasped around his knees and his back to the river, his eyes fixed on villa number 18. What a place, he thought. It was open on 3 sides, and an excessive garden lay on the 4th. The trees stood around the white body of the building like whispering figures. A scene like this felt familiar, full of reminders of the good living he'd once enjoyed. How had Ralph managed it? And in such a short time? Not even thieves could dream of owning a thing like this. I never used to look at a villa like this except when I was making plans to break into it. Is this really any hope of finding friendship in such a place now? You are indeed a mystery, Ralph Ilwan, and you must be made to reveal your secret. Wasn't it strange that Ilwan rhymed with Mehran? and that dog Eilish should grab and wallow in the fruits of my lifetime's labor? When a car stopped in front of the villa gate, he sprang to his feet. As the porter opened the gate, he darted across the road and stood before the car, bending a little so the driver could see him. When the man inside apparently failed to recognize him in the dark, Said roared, "Mr. Ralph, I am Said Mehron." The man put his head close to the open window of the car and repeated his name, in obvious surprise, his low voice carefully modulated. Said could not read Ralph's expression, but the tone of his voice was encouraging. After a moment of silence and inaction, the car door opened and Said heard him say, "Get in." A good beginning, he thought. Ralph Ailwan was the same man he knew, despite the glass-filled office suite in the lovely villa. The car went down a drive that curved like the shape of a violin toward a flight of steps leading to the main entrance of the house. "How are you, Said? When did you get out?" "Yesterday." "Yesterday?" "Yes, I should have come to see you, but I had some things I had to attend to, and I needed rest. So I spent the night at Sheikh Ali Junaidi's. Remember him?" "Sure. Your late father's sheikh. I watched his meetings with you lots of times." They left the car and went into the reception hall. They were fun, weren't they? "Yes, and I used to get a big kick out of their singing." A servant switched on the chandelier, and Said's eyes were dazzled by its size, its multitude of upturned bulbs, its stars and crescents. The light that spread throughout the room was caught in mirrors at the corners, reflecting the brilliance. Objets d'art on gilt stands were displayed as if they had been salvaged from the obscurity of history for that sole purpose. The ceiling, he saw, was richly decorated, while all around him comfortable chairs and cushions were casually disposed among vividly patterned carpets. His eyes rested on the face of Maitre Ilwan, now round and full, a face he had loved, whose features he had long ago learned by heart, having gazed at it so often while listening to Ralph speak, and stealing occasional glances at the objets d'art. Said went on examining that face while a servant drew back curtains and opened French windows to the veranda overlooking the garden, letting a breeze heavy with the perfume of blossomy trees flow into the room. The mixture of light and scent was distracting, but Said observed that Ilwan's face had become cow-like in its fullness, and that despite his apparent friendliness and courtesy, there was something chilly about him, as well as an unfamiliar and rather disturbing suavity, a quality that could only have come from a touch of blue blood, despite Ralph's flat nose and heavy jaw. What refuge would be left if this only surviving support also collapsed? Ralph sat near the French windows to this veranda on a sofa that was arranged with 3 easy chairs in a square around a luminous pillar. A luminous pillar adorned with mythological figures. Said sat down, without hesitation and without showing his anxiety. Ailwan stretched out his long legs. Did you look for me at the paper?" "Yeah, but I saw it wasn't a suitable place for us to meet." Ralph laughed, showing teeth stained black at the gums. "The office is like a whirlpool in constant motion. Have you been waiting long here?" "A lifetime." Ralph laughed again. "There was a time, no doubt, when you were quite familiar with this street." "Of course," Said too laughed. "My business transactions with my clients here made their premise unforgettable. The villa of Fadil Hassan Pasha, for instance, where my visit netted £1,000, or the one that belongs to the film star Quaqib, where I got a pair of superb diamond earrings." The servant came, pushing a trolley laden with a bottle, 2 glasses, a pretty little violet-colored ice bucket, a dish of apples arranged in a pyramid, plates with hors d'oeuvres, and long silver water jug. Ralph gestured to the servant to withdraw, filled 2 glasses himself, and offered one to Said, raising the other. "To freedom!" While Said emptied his glass in one gulp, Ralph took a sip and then said, "And how is your daughter? Oh, I forgot to ask you. Why did you spend the night at Sheikh Ali's?" "He doesn't know what happened," thought Said, "but he still remembers my daughter," and he gave Ralph a cold-blooded account of his misfortunes. "So yesterday I paid a visit to Al-Sarafi Lane," he concluded. "There I found a detective waiting for me, as I'd expected, and my daughter disowned me and screamed in my face." He helped himself to another whiskey. "This is a sad story. But your daughter isn't to blame. She can't remember you now. Later on she'll grow to know and love you." "I have no faith left in all her sex." That's how you feel now. But tomorrow, who knows how you'll feel? You'll change your opinion of your own accord. That's the way of the world. The telephone rang. Ralph rose, picked up the receiver, and listened for a moment. His face began to beam, and he carried the telephone outside to the veranda, while Saeed's sharp eyes registered everything. It must be a woman. A smile like that, strolling into the dark, could only mean a woman. He wondered if Ailwan was still unmarried. Though they sat there cozily drinking and chatting, Saeed now sensed that this meeting would be exceedingly difficult to repeat. The feeling was unaccountable, like the whispered premonition of some still undiagnosed cancerous growth. But he trusted it, relying on instinct. A resident now in one of those streets that Saeed had only visited as a burglar, this man, after all, may have only felt obligated to welcome him, having actually changed so much that only a shadow of the old self remained. When Saeed heard Ralph's sudden laugh resounding on the veranda, he felt even less reassured. Calmly, however, he took an apple and began to munch it, pondering the extent to which his whole life had been no more than the mere acting out of ideas that had come from the man now chuckling into a telephone. What if Ralph should prove to have betrayed those ideas? He would have to pay dearly for it, then. On that score there was not the slightest doubt. Ralph Ailwan came in from the veranda, replaced the telephone, and sat down looking extremely pleased. So, congratulations on your freedom. Being free is precious indeed. It more than makes up for losing anything else, no matter how valuable. Helping himself to a slice of pastrami, Saeed nodded in agreement, but without real interest in what had just been said. And now you've come out of prison to find a new world, Ralph went on, refilling both glasses, while Saeed wolfed down the hors d'oeuvres. Glancing at his companion, Saeed caught a look of disgust, quickly covered by a smile. You must be mad to think he was sincere in welcoming you. This only superficial courtesy, doing the right thing, will evaporate. And will evaporate. Every kind of treachery pales beside this. What a void would then swallow up the entire world! Ralph stretched his hand to a cigarette box adorned with Chinese characters, placed in a hollow in the illuminated pillar. My dear Saeed, he said, taking a cigarette, everything that used to spoil life's pleasures for us has now completely disappeared. The news astounded us in prison, Saeed said, his mouth full of food. Who could have predicted such things? He looked at Ralph, smiling. No class war now? Let there be a truce. Every struggle has its proper field of battle. And in this magnificent drawing room, said Saeed, looking around him, is like a parade ground. He saw a cold look in his companion's eyes and regretted the words instantly. Why can't your tongue ever learn to be polite? What do you mean? Ralph's voice was icy. I mean it's a model of sophisticated taste and... Don't try to be evasive, said Ralph with narrowed eyes. Out with it. I understand you perfectly. I know you better than anyone else. Saeed attempted a disarming laugh and then said, I meant no harm at all. Never forget that I live by the sweat of my brow. I haven't doubted that for a moment. Please don't be angry. Ralph puffed hard on his cigarette, but made no further comment. Aware that he ought to stop eating, Saeed said politely, apologetically, I haven't quite got over the atmosphere of prison. I need some time to recover my good manners and learn polite conversation. Apart from the fact that my head's still spinning from that strange meeting when my own daughter rejected me. Ralph's Mephistophelian eyebrows lifted in what looked like silent forgiveness. When he saw Saeed's gaze wander from his face to the food, as if asking permission to resume eating, he said quite calmly, Help yourself. Saeed attacked the rest of the dishes without hesitation, as if nothing had happened until he'd wiped them clean. At this point Ralph said, a little quickly, as he wished to end the meeting, Things must now change completely. Have you thought about your future? Saeed lit a cigarette. My past hasn't yet allowed me to consider the future. It occurs to me that there are more women in the world than men, so you mustn't let the infidelity of one lone female bother you. As for your daughter, she'll get to know you and love you one day. The important thing now is to look for a job. Saeed eyed a statue of a Chinese god, a perfect embodiment of dignity and repose. I learned tailoring in prison. So you want to set up a tailoring shop? Said Ralph with surprise. Certainly not, Saeed replied quietly. What then? Saeed looked at him. In my whole life I've mastered only one trade. You're going back to burglary? Rauf seemed almost alarmed. It's most rewarding, as you know. As I know. How the hell do I know? Why are you so angry? Saeed gave him a surprised look. I meant, as you know from my past. Isn't that so? Rauf lowered his eyes as if trying to assess the sincerity of Saeed's remark, clearly unable to maintain his bonhomie and looking for a way to end the meeting. Listen, Saeed, things are no longer what they used to be. In the past, you were both a thief and my friend for reasons you well know. Now the situation has changed. If you go back to burglary, you'll be a thief and nothing else. Dashed by Rauf's unaccommodating frankness, Saeed sprang to his feet. Then he stifled his agitation, sat down again, and said quietly, All right, name a job that's suitable for me. Any job, no matter what. You do the talking, I'll listen. I would be happy, Saeed began without obvious irony, to work as a journalist on your paper. I'm a well-educated man and an old disciple of yours. Under your supervision, I've read countless books, and you often testified to my intelligence. Rauf shook his head impatiently, his thick black hair glistening in the brilliant light. This is no time for joking. You've never been a writer, and you've got out of jail only yesterday. This fooling around is wasting my time. So I have to choose something menial? No job is menial as long as it's honest. Saeed felt utterly reckless. He ran his eyes quickly over the smart drawing room, then said bitterly, How marvelous it is for the rich to recommend poverty to us. Rauf's reaction was to look at his watch. I'm sure I've taken too much of your time, Saeed said quietly. Yes, said Rauf, with the blank directness of a July sun. I'm loaded with work. Thanks for your kindness and hospitality, and for the supper, Saeed said, standing up. Rauf took out his wallet and handed him 2 5-pound notes. Take these to tide you over. Please forgive me for saying I'm overloaded with work. You'll seldom find me free as I was tonight. Saeed smiled, took the banknotes, shook his hand warmly, and wished him well. May God increase your good fortune.